David, what do you think about the all the UAP stuff going on in Congress
Yeah,
at the moment?
that was
Oh,
gonna be something I was gonna ask today too.
yeah, that's it's it feels like it's going to do the same thing that the SRI remote viewing thing did with psychic studies, which is just crash it and turn
Hmm.
it into
Hmm.
a bunch of crappy paperwork nonsense.
Hmm.
Yeah, it. I don't know. I think people are getting way too excited about it.
Yeah,
That's
I mean, why when you have such a rich cult history, um, why excitement over stemming that all into one of the most inept bureaucracies? It's a very strange thing to me, and it's really strange to see, especially with all the information out there on past manipulations of information and that the amount of you know grassroots movement that they've been able to sort of foster around this narrative is really sad to me because it's I mean no one's reading the old stuff, no one's actually looking at the history. Those who are, it's very kind of snarky and um, how would you, very ironic, so it's really just kind of it's got this really binary feel to it, and the stuff with the government, I mean, I don't know. It just looks like a circus, I mean, that the UAP congressional hearings that they had, those the folks that the Congress members that they had doing that are not really high level. I mean, you've got Timbershot from Tennessee, who's talking aliens or demons kind of stuff, and he's all tied in with a lot of the kind of charismatic and evangelical circles that turn this into a spiritual warfare thing.
Hmm.
It's just not. I don't know. It doesn't look like it's going anywhere interesting.
Because I've noticed that people people involved in this seem to have lost their facility for critical thinking. Um,
Yeah,
I mean, I don't know about you guys, but this so-called whistleblower dude, what's his name?
David
The
Grush.
Grush.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that guy, Grush. Yeah, he sets off so many alarm bells for me. It's like bullshit detectors. Like goes off the meter whenever he's on screen. I just don't. I don't think he's for real. Like, and it's so obvious to me that he's not for real. And people are just eating this up. Like, Also, the conversation is still centered around nuts and bolts,
Yeah,
which we should be so far past that, but we're not. And so that's who's really driving the narrative of these nuts and bolts people. And so as long as that's the case, we're going to get nowhere with this conversation. It's not even a conversation. I feel like we're being hustled into a hall that that I don't know about you, but I don't want to go down that hall. Um,
yeah. And it's what you were saying too with Grush. I think that if you listen carefully to what he's saying, and this has been
mhm.
pointed out, it's he heard things, right? And you
Yeah,
can go back to Jacques Vallée's journals, the Forbidden Science series, and you see that the entire history of this of the of this level of the presentation of the UFO topic is just a bunch of I heard this from so and so, or there was a rumor
yeah,
running around, and then that
yeah.
trickles down, and it's people assuming that folks in positions in the military or at a research institution or a think tank or whatever are any less susceptible to rumors that kind of tickle their fancy and what they're interested in. It's just foolish because that's a lot of it. You have Kit Green, who was the one of the over the CIA weird desk, right? That's what he's famous for, and he was involved with the remote viewing program, and he's had a long history in this subject. But in Vallee's journals, uh, there's Green talking about alien autopsy videos that he thinks are real, and then oh wait, no, it wasn't, and it's just this like feed of rumors and stuff. And a lot of the people that are coming out as quote unquote insiders, when you really listen to what they're saying, they were told something. And until we actually see something, and the thing is, if you go to then, well, what does it mean to see something, and where's that information? We'll start going to the, we got since the 1940s, we have reports of people encountering stuff, and those reports of encounters are completely different, you know. I mean, and they're weird and they're strange, and they're, you know, even when it is like an encounter with a nuts and bolts craft kind of idea, those encounters are incredibly strange, and we don't have that. You know, we really don't have that with this stuff. There's a couple people from that initial wave with the Nimitz encounter and the Princeton, who have had, you know, have gone on to say that they had kind of a numinous experience, or that they had some sort of initiatory awakening with the subject. But again, looking carefully at their narrative, they were already primed for that prior to this. And, you know, as Joe knows, and Ken, you know, when you put media in front of people who are primed for something, they can have a wild experience. You know, Bigfoot can show up and they're talking about it. But that doesn't mean that, you know, it doesn't mean that there's this direct connection to the thing. You know, it's not that, you know, they could have seen a drone, and because of the way they interpreted it, suddenly they're on this vision quest and, you know, having weird experiences, synchronicities, you know, all the rest of it. But, you know, the actual trigger for that was them seeing a drone that they misinterpreted, you know.
Yeah.
And with the stuff going on with China and everything, and with the amount of technology that's available on just a, you know, on a civilian scale, yeah, it's really strange and kind of disappointing to see this opportunity for citizen science and, you know, citizen interaction with research, and that turning into what's basically, like you were saying, Joe, we're just being fed a narrative and people are eating it up and they're running with it, you know. And it's just this, I mean, if you look at Twitter or X, you know, the conversation on there, it's so just tunnel. It's just a tunnel of the same, you know, it's this one single narrative. And even if the narrative has branches, you know, and it goes back to ancient alien stuff, you know, which is, there's an interesting history there with NASA. You know, some of the first people that were kind of talking, were jumping on the Von Daniken bandwagon, were NASA readers were interested in it. You know, there's a book called I think it's Ships of Ezekiel or something like that. But again, those are beliefs, and those are, you know, ideas that they were looking at, and now we're bringing that into the conversation again. As you know, you've got people talking about, you know, ancient alien. I don't know. The conversation itself is rated, you know.
Yeah.
Well, you know, I think a lot of this goes back to the same problem I had 20 whatever years ago with doing the Ox-Hap project. Is I was trying to present, as you know, a non-zero sum game, an infinite game, to the. Unfortunately, I wasn't filtering. I was just putting it out to the general population. What I discovered, like, you know, like any good failed experiment that's never failed, you come away with something, is that the majority of people out there do not even understand how to play an infinite game. They only know how to play zero sum games. And so when how that translates to this situation is, as Dave was saying, if people actually were had experience with like ritual magic, great example. Ritual magic is like all the things that we were just saying. You put yourself in this state of mind to get these results. And yes, it may be a drone that sets you off and you go on this vision quest. You still go on a vision quest. You still come back with things from that vision quest that are valuable and useful. But you also know, as the magician, that it probably was something mundane that you interpreted on purpose. You mind tricked yourself so you could go into this inner space and then have this liminal experience. And I think that's where it breaks down for most people, because when you say it's not some, what did Terence McKenna used to say, like intergalactic pro bono proctologists that have come. But it's true. It's like it's probably not that. It's almost certainly not. There's a lot of reasons why it's probably not that. The physics alone is a reason why it's that. But you know, like lots of other reasons. And why does it have to be that? And then see, when I see people getting didactic about it, like Dave was saying on Twitter, I recall when I was trying to like run the game and explain to everybody, everybody's experience is valid. There is no one experience that's valid. The only thing we should be doing is comparing experiences to see if we can learn from everybody else's, but not saying that my experience or our experience is the valid one versus everybody else's. And I couldn't break people. uh, having to do that, right? So everybody is in position of I have to be right, and
Yeah.
you can't go into these things with that mindset, because if you do, you're already wrong. You
Yeah.
can guarantee you're already wrong. That's the
Well,
only way you can be wrong, is to say that I'm the one that's right.
what was interesting, I noticed that there's been a lot more. There's been a rise in people believing that Ong's hat still is in the game at the moment. I've noticed that a lot recently.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
That seems to have
It's
gone
like
hand in hand, weirdly.
it's like every couple of years it goes through a cycle. And then I get all, like, either I get, which the last couple of years have been interesting because I got a lot of young people who recognize it for what it was and say, like, I'm an artist like you, I want to do something like that, and that encourages me. Like, that's the whole reason I did this. But there's also at the same time, it's almost like 50%. There's also a rise in people that want to, contact me and be combative and accuse me of, like, running some kind of government op, or doing it for, like, data harvesting purposes, like all the bullshit that I'm going to hear again and again and again. But it's like a great example of, like, the thing that I just did with the BBC, like, not the one that's coming out soon, but the thing that just happened.
Mm-hmm.
The producers of that were actually of that mindset, which I didn't really get it till, like, we were all the way in, and they didn't even really reveal it till they were already in. But they were of the mindset that I had done something evil, and I had to fight them all the way to the release of this thing. Like they really wanted to shit on me.
Oh,
Like,
shit.
that's really, yeah, that was their whole thing. So it really convinced me that going forward, nobody else ever will ever get their hands on my art ever again. It's always going to be produced by me, solely by me. Period. I'm
Mm.
just not going to do any more of this stuff with especially major media people, because
Yeah. So
they're completely duplicitous, and they don't even see there's anything wrong with being like that. It's like, wow, you're a sociopath, aren't you?
well, and that's the kind of narrative driving thing, I mean, with Ong's hat coming back as people believing it, I think that's sort of, that's one of the problems with the way that the UFO stuff is coming out, right? Because now everybody's searching for answers.
Yeah,
So you have, they've been released into the game field to, like, run and search for clues on, where are the metamaterials, and is time travel possible, and all of that. And Ong's hat was so ubiquitous in in those things. I mean, you go back to the early message boards where you've got Put Off arguing with Kit Green on the the message boards and stuff, and within that milieu, Ong's hat is sitting there. It's kind of floating around in the background of all that. And so these people who are digging in to try to find these answers, they're going to hit on Ong's hat. And if they're of that mind to to think that it was real, or to try to interpret it in a way that they understand, and with the media, when you have something like the BBC, or the way that News Nation has jumped on to the UFO topic, they're really uncritical, and the only thing that they want to do is, they have this really kind of, like, cookie cutter narrative, and they want to drive that. And so they're searching for those little spices and the M&Ms to put on top, and the things to spice up this plain cookie that they have. And they grab onto something like Ong's hat because it's interesting, whatever, but they're not talking about Ong's hat. I mean, they're talking about what their idea is that they're trying to drive. And with the UFO topic and that, I mean, there was a, over in the UK, there was a news thing that had a representative of the Aetherius Society on talking about the UFO topic in US Congress. And it was amazing because, I mean, Aetherius Society is George King, channeling Venusians, and he's a contactee in that. And they were brought on as, an equal expert to, whoever else they would have, someone who was more nuts and bolts, or, you could have a NASA administrator and then the representative of Aetherius Society talking about the UFO, and that's, equally valid. And I mean, don't get me wrong, I love the Aetherius Society, but if
yeah.
I were, as a news agency, that would not be my first choice to bring on as the people to talk about the current iteration, and they had no context for it, whoever they had as their research assistant or whatever. didn't care. This is a group, had UFO, let's go. You know, I mean, that's the gist of it.
Yeah, it feels like there's, I don't know if you two have noticed this as well. It feels like there's this kind of weird remystification going on at the moment, where lots, like the conspiracy sphere feels like it's really focusing in on the occult a lot more at the moment, and the general public, and like TikTok's suddenly flooded with occultism, and people. It almost feels like people are trying to build a new mythology for themselves, but they're getting a lot of it wrong. It's what it feels like to me. But you often, you know, you have. Yeah, I mean, well, the occult world's bickery anyway. You know, it's the most bickery of groups you can. You know, I've never seen so many people bicker.
Well, you should the UFO topic. Rivals the.
Okay. Yeah, the UFO stuff has always been the occult, and the UFO stuff has always been that way. There's always been like this, like really nasty infighting. Like people, I guess people don't remember, but if you, I started reading UFO material like in grade school, and down in the 70s. That's how old I am. So I remember like when first I was like reading all these books, and I was like, oh, this is really cool, you know. And then as I got a little deeper, I get into some of the homegrown literature, you know, some of the zines, I guess you would call them nowadays. And I was really like a fifth grader, like opening this up and looking at it and being astonished, like these people are calling each other names and threatening each other. I'm like, what is this all about? It's like, I thought we were all in this together. No.
Well, we just interviewed Frater UD, and he's infamous for the what was it called, the Ice War, whatever it was, where him versus Peter Carroll battling it out.
Oh,
over,
yeah.
I've got, what was the name of the IoT? We were just talking about it. I should remember this. Yeah. So so I suppose it has always been there. It is interesting though. There just seems to be this I don't know, almost like a satanic panic starting to happen again as well. Which
yes.
Is
yes.
You know, and that's one of the, I mentioned Timbershot as one of the congressmen who did the UFO congressional hearing thing. And Burchett is, you know, his Christian beliefs align with third wave charismatic groups that are pushing that, right? Like there's a whole sub, and the thing is, like, the Christian stuff really floats under the surface because nobody outside it is really looking at it. And there's some academics that study it because it's had effects in politics. But I don't think that they fully grasp like just what is going on. You know, I mean, it's got an Ong's hat kind of feel to it in that they're creating this reality. You know, I mean, there's a Skywatch is a program, sort of media conglomerate that sits in this space, and Timbershot is in with these people in this Skywatch ministry. I don't know, it's like a media ministry sort of thing. But they, you know, I mean, their whole focus is on transhumanism as bringing back the body of the Antichrist. Right, the idea that like the internet is going to form the body of the Antichrist. UFOs are demons. They go through the, you know, there's books that they've written. They source John Keel. They source Jacques Vallée. They source, you know, they source any. They, you know, they're very into the idea that Jack Parsons opened a gate. You know, the UFOs came in, that the whole Babylon working mythology, and that all comes from these charismatic spiritual warfare groups who have a really sophisticated sense of spiritual warfare, because some of the founding people within this movement, as it sits now, like this guy C. Peter Wagner, they applied, you know, some of the intelligence modalities of psyops and shaping, you know, creating an atmosphere and then moving in, and they call it strategic spiritual warfare. And what it is it's weaponized exorcism, kind of, you know, and so, but they do it, you know, they'll go into an area and identify the overarching spirit, right? What's the principality of this area? And it just so happens to be, you know, if they go to Africa, well, obviously the principality is sitting at the traditional shrine for the village, right? So we gotta go and have what they call a power encounter and exercise that and demonstrate the power of Christianity over this heathen belief, you know. And they have a very warfare oriented sense of, you know, I don't know if people maybe familiar, it's been talked about in the news, dominionism, but this idea of bringing the kingdom of Christ to the earth in the present time, right? And so Timbershot, who's over the UAP congressional hearings and is really pushing this in Congress, he's a member of that worldview. He's part of that worldview and the groups that are pushing that, you know. And so when that spreads into the internet culture, you have people, I mean, Nick Redfern, right? They quote Nick Redfern's Final Events.
Yeah, the Colin's Elite, isn't it? That's what it's called.
Yeah, the Colin's Elite
Yeah.
idea. And that flows into their narrative, and they bring that in. They're perfectly, because the other, I mean, they're amazing at manipulating and reframing media so that they can, you know, as a form of, you know, ministry and evangelism. But what it comes down to is it's an information operation, you know. And so they're doing this, and then it spreads into TikTok, because at the level where the public is engaging this information, you know, if you think that UFOs are a spiritual entity, right, like you're going to run into the spiritual warfare stuff from these groups, as well as, you know, other people who are framing it a different way. And then you have people, you know, I mean, even people that are working, you know, in ufology at higher levels, right? Like, I mean, I'm thinking like academics talk about the Collins Elite. Academics talk about UFOs as demons, and they're not discerning where these ideas are coming from, you know. And so it is kind of bringing back this sense of sort of a satanic panic. And there's this weird thing that's happened over the last decade too, where a lot of people have sort of turned against human potential and that kind of thing. So all these ideas that came out in the 70s and 80s and you know, late 60s have been now framed as a psyop, and they've been framed as, you know, like, yeah, we do have these potentials, but every single person prior to now who's talked about it, they've all been, you know, trying to trick us and steal our power, kind of thing. And, you know, you see that, you know, with people that should know better, you know, kind of treating that. I think Joe ran into that the other day on Twitter. He had posted something about the Collins Elite, or a comment, and it turned out that the person was totally down with the idea of the Collins Elite and the idea that, you know, Jack Parsons, and this person is an occultist, right? And they're like, but Jack Parsons is evil, you know, like, but this was evil.
Kenneth Grant.
Oh,
Yeah.
Like Grant always gets called in, doesn't he?
Yeah.
You know, and it's just a really strange, you know, and it even had the, like, you know, they said, like, it was something like, I've really been doing this research, like, you know, they're very proud of this thread that they've created, and, you know, they're putting the pieces together, you know, they're tracing the map out, and, like, obviously, you know, Parsons and Grant and all the rest have destroyed the reality frame for us all, you know. And it's odd because we, you know, with that kind of stuff, it's like, you're going to spend your time on that. Like, there's a lot more interesting sort of pieces to use in your puzzle. You know, you can go a little bit deeper and create something much stranger and more interesting. But, you know, it's kind of like the lowest hanging fruit gets shoved into this rotten basket.
That's why I always say to conspiracy kind of people is, like, you don't, especially when you're looking at the occult, you really don't need to make up all this stuff. There's so much kind of interesting meat there.
Yeah,
it's already there.
Yeah. It's like, why would you need to, you know? I saw something the other day. Someone was doing a YouTube video about Atlantis, and Atlantis has become a real thing again recently. Atlantis and Lemuria. Yeah. So this guy was. Do you remember there was a toy you could get? It might even still be in production, but it's like, I think it's called Simon Says, and it's like it has four colors on it, and you'd have to repeat the color pattern. This guy had a picture, you know, the famous like Platonian kind of map of Atlantis, where it's like it's a similar shape.
Oh yeah.
So this guy was making the implication that the Simon Says toy was actually some kind of Atlantean mind control.
I love
it. It was,
of course.
This is what, and it just feels like do you remember we've spoken about this before, Jay? You know, like, we used to talk about how conspiracy was kind of fun until about 9/11, and then it kind of really went dark and went way more to the right and all this kind of stuff. There's a part of me hoping that this is a sign that it's going back into the sort of high strangeness kind of. I think they maybe all got drained after QAnon, and now, like, the weirdos are taken back over again. That would be a good thing, but I'm not sure. I think that might be wishful thinking. I don't know.
Well, I think there's always a 50-50 split, I think. like, like the thing we all have to remember is that not everybody succeeds in initiation.
Yeah.
Just remember that some people flunk the test, and they end up in Chapel Perilous. Some people don't get out of Chapel Perilous. Chapel Perilous is a great thing to go through. You can say that as long as you come out the other side, right? But if you're one of those people, and I've met some of these people because I work these days because I'm kind of a retired guy that writes stupid books. I work a lot of my days are spent working with what's called the houseless because they don't like to be called homeless. And a lot of the houseless are people that suffer from the idea that they're part of a organized gang stalking, and so this is all conversations I have on a daily basis with people now. And for whatever reason, because I listen to them with respect and don't just tell them that they need to get medicated, um, they come to me and talk to me, and because I'll listen to what they're saying and I don't just discount it because they don't think all of it's bullshit, right? I think some of it is definitely coming from a space of misinterpreting what's happening in the world because of their circumstances, because a lot of different things have led them to believe that the world is out to get them, and I don't blame them for that because the world is out to get them to a certain point when they're houseless. Um, so, but having said that, um, there is this resurgence of ideas that are not new ideas. Like when people started coming to me a couple years ago and asking me about this QAnon thing, because that was a thing I was doing on the circuit for a while. Um, I just tried to get through to them that none of these ideas were new. None of it was new. It was just now a new uh, aggregate of these ideas, which are all old ideas. The reptilians are old ideas. Like all of this is new. The one thing that pissed me off when I saw the Collins Elite thing, I think it's when I read Renfern's book. What was that? 10 years ago now, when he
It
came
was a
out with
while
that
ago.
book.
Yeah.
Yeah, Dave probably remembers because I had a tantrum. I said, I said, this is going to get picked up. Like
Yeah.
this is the kind of thing that's going to get picked up. And a lot of people that I told that to like didn't see it, but here we are. We're like 10 years later or 11 or whatever it is years later, and you've got people, as Dave is pointing out, you've got people in positions of power now who are advocating this thinking.
Yeah.
So,
And it's really strange with the Collins Elite thing too, because I mean, dealing, and having conversations with academics and being like, this isn't real. Like, I mean, this is not, this is a mythos. Like, you need to understand that this is a fictional meta framing of Christian kickback, evangelical kickback in and Mormon, kickback against these ideas in the government and in the military and in the intelligence circles. And they're like, yeah, okay. And then I hear them, on a podcast or something mentioning the Collins Elite, and I'm like, were you listening? Like, just like, you're an academic. Like, come on, this is not like this. The only source for this is a popular press book by Nick Redfern, who just churns them out. Like, he's a pulp writer, which is fine. Like, no disrespect to that, but like, it has its place. And if you're an academic, like, that's not, you don't source that, and no one goes back. I mean, Ray Boucher is out there. The source for Redfern's column, Ray Boucher is active. You can talk to him, and again, it's another, I heard this, or these people came to me and said this. And we don't have faces. And what we do have, I mean, we've got something like an actual academic investigation of evangelical influence in politics, which is Jeff Charlotte's book, The Family, and there's a Netflix miniseries on it too, which really points out like what the reality of this is. And it's a lot scarier and a lot more, invasive than just the Collins Elite blocking psychic studies and UFOs. I mean, these networks of power are completely different. And I think, it's sad to me because it's such a distraction to have this Collins Elite idea out there when the actual mechanisms of power are being, pulled and manipulated by people who have these strange worldviews, or maybe not, maybe strange is a bad word, but dangerous, I would think, worldviews, very, very judgmental and skewed.
Do you think
You
it
know,
might
in
be? No, go on.
go ahead.
I was going to say, do you think it might be like a Christian power grab almost? Like I've
Oh yeah, absolutely.
I've noticed because statistically now we can see that Christianity's in decline. I saw some stat that said like it's the first time in history that America's have gone under 50%. Identifying as Christians.
Right.
In the UK, we had something similar as well recently, and I wonder if doesn't this all feel like it's very convenient for the church or for the for Christianity? And it's like, oh, hang on, if we can get them scared again, then we might get them back through the doors again, and that's really what it feels like to me a lot of the time.
Well, I wrote a piece years and years ago looking at Billy Graham because I had noticed that the footage of Triumph of the Will, right, with Hitler, and it's in black and white, and he's doing his thing.
Yeah.
If you put that up next to Billy Graham at the same time, right, like Billy Graham comes out in like 1947, right? If you put that up to, and you put them side by side, it is the same rhetorical devices. And if you look at the history of Billy Graham is not a good person. Billy Graham is a bircher, he was in with groups that you would never, the average person on the street, well, maybe they wouldn't even have any context for it, but not good, right? I mean, like not a good guy. Like he's the pastor of the presidents for a reason. The guy's a political operative, and it's really, the power grab concept. This has been in play for a long time. I mean, you can look at Gary North's book, Unholy Spirits, right? Talks about Keel, talks about Valet. This is a book from the 80s. And it's talking about the psychic studies or maybe, I think it's 80s, but it may be early 90s, but talking about the psychic warfare programs and the rest of it. You can look at, I mean, one of the interesting things with just how sort of ubiquitous this sort of infiltration or whatever you want to call it is, there's books from the late 80s from Christian ministries that are looking at counter-cult stuff and anti-cult behavior. And they're talking about the psychic warfare programs, which weren't declassified until 95. And they're talking about them in a knowledgeable way because their prayer circles had people from the FBI, had people from the DIA, had people from various, military and intelligence going to these prayer circles and talking about what was going on at SRI and talking about some of the Army programs and that. So, they had this inside scoop on this stuff, but then they frame it in a very specific way, and it comes out, and then, it gets declassified. And look, they were summoning demons and all the rest of it, And so, this kind of power grab, as the population moves away from it, the seats of power are being more and more sort of, brought into this,
This Collins Elite stuff is not a narrative that's new. In the 70s, when I was, as I said before, I was already reading all the UFO stuff, like anything I could get my hands on, I was reading. My grandmother on my dad's side was a fundamentalist. And in fact, she took me to a filming of an Estes Perkel film. I missed being in the film by like 1 foot to the left. I can actually point out the people I'm sitting next to that did make the cut. I can say that. I can tell you their names because I was with them and my grandmother. So my grandmother got concerned that I was getting into this UFO stuff too much. And thankfully I had a buffer between her and me through my parents. But like she gave me these audio tapes. This was like 70 something. I'm going to say 76-ish. She gave me these audio tapes that I took home and I listened to, which I think they were supposed to scare me, but in fact I found them like highly entertaining. It was this guy. I wish I could remember his name. Peter something. He's a preacher, and he did a whole series. There was like 15 tapes in this series where he took the UFO phenomena and he broke it down biblically. And it's the same. It's the same narrative. Like like UFOs, how they what is a UFO? Well, if we look at it through this lens, it actually is the creature that the Book of Revelations was talking about that had the hair of a lion and and so I mean this stuff has been there forever. It's like it's been there for a long time. It just hasn't been as popular as it is now. But you could see.
Well, and that's
over time that it's becoming that.
Yeah, and that's kind of the weaponization of it, right? Is because C. Peter Wagner and them, they collated all that stuff, and part of it is and it comes out of the charismatic spiritual warfare scene, because there's an interesting sort of parallel history here. In 1947, right, you've got Kenneth Arnold, you got Roswell, you have the beginning of the current sort of iteration of the UFO idea. But in 1947, the other thing that you had was there was the healing revivals, right? Like, so you had this massive healing revival across the United States and in Britain and in Australia and South Africa and that. And this healing revival is where televangelism, right? Like Oral Roberts and like a lot of those people got their start in this healing revival. And when the UFO thing hit, right, when Kenneth Arnold gets popular, the initial interpretation was that this was a sign from God. These were angels coming, and the end was near, right? And that was the interpretation of it in these healing revival publications. I can't remember the name of the specific one. There's a like a publication that was like the magazine of the healing revival, and it writes about this. I don't think it might have been Lester Summerall, but it was some famous evangelist that was talking about how these UFOs are angels, right? Then what they did was they got some of the contactees in the 50s to come and talk at their healing revivals. So you've got Truman Bathroom, who's a contactee, coming to this healing revival. You've got a preacher talking about, the end of time and the Lord's coming back and everything. And then you get Truman Bathroom come up there and start talking about what he heard from his contact with the UFO people, right? But what immediately happened was that Truman Bathroom is talking in the sort of theosophical Christ sort of way that comes out of the contactees, Jesus is an alien missionary kind of stuff. And the evangelicals, and the charismatics are like, oh, wait a second. Right, like that's not biblical. Like, what are you talking about? And he's like, oh yeah, Jesus was representative of this idea beforehand. And so then you get the kickback immediately where they go, oh wait, we thought they were angels, but it's a false sign. It's a sign of the end times still, but it's the demons. And this starts out, in the late 40s, early 50s is already that's the way it starts getting framed. And there's I have a great book. It's called like UFOs on the Moon or something like that, it's an amazing like early 50s sort of presentation of the idea of the UFOs in spiritual warfare, and it's got this great cover. It's and it's interesting now. Some of the ministries that were around then that published these books on in the 50s and 60s on UFOs as demons and framed that way. Now, if they still have some of their catalogs and their smaller ministries, so they don't even bother to like change it, right? Like they still have copies of the book from the 50s that they never sold. So if you get it, and they've X'd out where the UFO books were because it's no longer relevant to what they're talking about. But these books still have the sort of mention of this UFO period in Christianity, and then what happens in the 80s with the very like heavy politics, politics moving into it, and the really framing it, the moral majority movement, right, which was an artificial creation of this idea of the moral majority and driving forward the Christian ideals. You get that narrative coming back in, but in a much more concise, concentrated way. And then out of that comes this idea of the commons elite, But like you're saying, Joe, I mean, it was there from the very beginning. And it was, it was part of this idea. Billy Graham has a book called Angels, and in it he talks about the UFOs as angels.
Of course.
And that was written in like 71 or 72.
Yep.
It feels like that show Hellier. Did you see that, both of you?
Yeah. I threw my shoes at the television a few times during that. Yeah.
If I hear the word synchronicity one more time, God damn it! Yeah,
I mean, just the whole methodology of how they did things was just like, what are you doing?
But one thing they did do was they were very popular with a kind of subset of people. I think that were kind of lightly conspiratorial. And I think that when they introduced people like Alan Greenfield into the, I think that kind of sparked something as well, where people started to, confluate aliens and the occult. We were talking earlier about aliens and kind of, I think there seems to be this real interest again in like that connection between UFOs and occultism, and somehow it's kind of slipped into the conspiracy sphere now, and they all seem to be. It seems to be this real mess rather of kind of everything's become kind of tangled up. I hear it all the time now, and I swear a lot of it came from the popular, how popular Hellier was, and that kind of connection between, no disrespect to Hellier at all, but it's I think it was an accidental thing. I don't think they don't strike me as conspiratorial at all, but maybe I'm wrong. not in the Alex Jones sense.
No,
anyway.
I don't think they are. I don't think they are. I think I have issues with their methodology for sure. And my last book, Study Numero, I actually I did a couple that were doing a podcast, and they were definitely a parody of Hellier. I call it the name of the podcast was Handbasket, as in hell in, but the thing is that none of this stuff is new. I think what Greenfield did, I thought was brilliant. Like, I love reading his stuff. Like, one of the guys that was early involved in Grey Lodge was one of the first people to like help Alan bring that whole thing back into print. The secret ciphers and all that stuff. I mean, like I obviously I'm skeptical as to like what is that really about, but just I find it, I don't want to say humorous. I find it entertaining, and it's food for thought. And Alan's like not a stupid person, so he kind of knows what he's doing. I'll just say that. But when I think when that was brought into Hellier, that was a lot of people's first exposure to that thinking. Like, and so I was kind of surprised when that came into play. I was like, what, really?
Yeah. I was like, he's actually in the show. What the hell? It was really weird.
I was like, how did they run across this, of all things? Because like, to me at that point, it was a very marginal,
I mean, even because I'm sort of quite involved in the whole Thelemic world, and even in that world, Greenfield
was marginal.
Yeah. It was like even more marginal than Kenneth Grant at the time. Grant went through, especially in the States, Grant went through this phase where he was like ridiculed and kind of, he was like a sort of Thelemic outcast almost. And then when Greenfield, I remember when Greenfield left the OTO, that was pretty much it. No one really heard from him for a long time after that. He was like, he had his big kind of, leaving in a blaze of glory thing, and then he just seemed to vanish, and then. But Hellier really brought him back, didn't they? In a big way, I think. And, and it's a good thing. I think Greenfield's great, but he's. I've just got his new book actually today. It landed on the doormat today. But,
I saw that. Let me know how it is, because I definitely want to get that. But up until Hellier, Greenfield was what Robert Anton Wilson used to call himself, which is the counterculture's counterculture.
Yeah. Well, and he goes actually back to the silver age of saucers.
Yeah.
He started out as a ufologist in the 60s, and knew Mosley, and he knew I'm pretty sure he met Ray Palmer, and if not, I think he corresponded with him. He's in the Ray Palmer Flying Saucer magazines as a writing in letters and stuff like that, so that was kind of his beginnings.
He met Valet, didn't he? But he was uncredited as meeting him when Valet first came to the States, before his book had been translated into English. He met with, I can't remember the name of the ufologist, a very well regarded ufologist at the time, and Greenfield was actually part of the kind of entourage that met him.
There's some amazing pictures of him at those early like UFO congresses and stuff. A young Greenfield in a suit and looking very respectable. But he knew Keel and stuff. I mean, so he has this history and this topic, and it's interesting now to see it comes back around, and then through Hellier it's blended back together, and like he's come. I was on there was a Conspiranormal podcast had some Zoom meetings during the pandemic, and Greenfield was on those, and I was asking him about like, did he still have stuff, right? Like, does he still have material from that time period? Because all the saucer magazines and just ephemera and stuff. And he was like, "Oh, I got boxes. They're plastic boxes filled with stuff." He's like, didn't care, just like, "Yeah, I got a bunch of crap from then. Like, it's sitting in storage. Don't care, And now it seems like with the UFO becoming a more of a hot topic, I see him on Twitter posting more about UFOs and stuff, and I think he's sort of reclaiming part of his past, which he had kind of relegated to the plastic storage.
Well, I mean, that stuff comes and goes, and again, to most of us here, I think we've seen the evolution of this stuff like come and go. So,
yeah,
I remember back in the 80s when I first started working with a group in Santa Cruz that it was actually the group that came to be known as the Black Lodge.
The Black Lodge of Santa Fe, was it that one? That lot?
Well, they called themselves Orbit One.
Orbit One. Oh, okay.
And it was a group of people with David Jones that left the Berkeley Lodge, and they all went to formed a lodge in Santa Cruz called Orbit One. But anyway, they as early as like the 80s when I was working with those guys, and I wasn't a member of the lodge. I was just kind of like working with them alongside them because they were doing some Enochian stuff that I was interested in, and I introduced them to Ralph Abraham, and he was doing an academic examination of Enochian, and John D.
It was Santa Cruz, yeah. Sorry, I just looked it up. It was there's a PDF floated around. It's like where it's like It's like a real adventure, isn't it? They're like doing Enochian stuff. Yeah, and like trying to avoid bilberries and all sorts. It's quite funny.
Yeah, but I mean, but the reality of that situation. So there's somebody here who was not involved in the middle of that. I was watching it from the outside. It was a group of people. There was obviously with any group of people, there's always these political dynamics that happen. The guy who wrote it, I think he went by Sater when he wrote it, but his real name was Michael. He and his wife got involved in what happens with these things. Like people get involved with other people, there's feelings are hurt and stuff like that. I remember going over there one time and knocking on the door and hearing bumping and screaming inside the apartment, and then somebody eventually came to the door and they just cracked the door and said, "Do it that will so be the whole of the law." And I just love is the law, love it or will, and they opened the door and let me in. And they claimed that when I knocked on the door, I triggered some demons that were running around the apartment or something. And I'm just scratching our head. I'm like, what the hell is going on over here? Well, then I discovered what was going on around there was there was some methamphetamine use. So yeah, of course, everybody got paranoid and it all got weird. Yeah, of course.
Yeah, who would have thought that a bunch of people doing magic might go a bit weird. That seems to
be and when you add bad drugs to the formula, then it gets even weirder. So when I read that Black Lodge thing, I'm like, well, yeah, there was some stuff going on. There were people being stupid, but I don't buy that there was a Black Lodge. It was a bunch of people. Some of them are very intelligent. Who went on to do some really great scholarship around D and around who just got weird. It drugs got involved, healings got involved, and people got weird. And that's really what it all boils down to. But when you read this stuff, and if you weren't somebody who was around, although I was, so I have a filter. But if I wasn't there and I read this, I might read this like I think it's intended. There was this. Once upon a time, there was a Black Lodge in Santa Cruz. It's like that's what and people pick that up and they repeat it. This is like the same thing we're talking about again and again. So with this Colin's Elite stuff, I know a meme when I see it. I know something that's potentially a meme when I see it. When I saw that Colin's Elite stuff, I was like, uh-oh. How can I stomp this fire out? But too late.
Yeah. I remember that distinctly. You were you were
Do
like,
you remember
this is
how
the
upset
wild.
I was?
Oh yeah.
Well,
Well,
because I
because it
saw
was
the I saw the potential, you know.
yeah, and well, and it was kind of sad too because there was at that time period you had books on Jack Parsons coming out that were sort of
Yeah,
reevaluating his life and
yeah,
bringing forward just the weirdness of the fact that Jack Parsons was like, so not I don't, integral maybe a little overblown term, but he was, he was in the founding of the space program. Like he was there, like at
yeah.
the beginning, doing this stuff during, like Manhattan Project era stuff, and after that, right? But like in that, to have that reframing sort of hijacked by this Collins elite idea, it was like, man, really? Like, are we gonna do this? Like, why?
Well, also the thing that annoyed me a lot about that, because as you probably know, Dave, I'm a huge fan of Jack Parsons, um,
Yeah,
and I think as a lot of people have pointed out, sometimes he could be a little sloppy with with his magic, um, but he definitely had heart, and he had the heart of a poet, and I think that's necessary to do good magic is to have the heart of a poet, not just be because I think as Crowley put it, um, the method of science, the aim of religion, right? And I would probably change that a little bit because I don't like the aim of religion necessarily, but I get what he was saying. I don't want to split hairs, and I think people along the way have like dropped the aim of religion idea, or I would say heart of the poet. That
yeah,
resonates better for me than aim of religion. Aim of religion to me means take over the world and convert everybody, but
yeah,
which I'm not okay with. But um, I think what got lost along the way was the spirit that Jack was definitely, you know, an icon for. And so I look at and people like Kenneth Grant and Jack Parsons to me are the true current. They represent the true current.
Well, it's definitely the thing that's really interesting at the moment is there's a massive boom in Kenneth Grant at the moment. Like everywhere you
Good.
look, yeah, and which is good, which is great. But I wonder why it took so long, and I wonder if this has something to do with the UAP thing as well, because Grant was quite
yeah,
UAP kind of heavy, wasn't he? I
yeah,
can say UAP just because it just seems to be what everyone's calling it these days. I
Yeah,
prefer
yeah,
UFOs, but it is really, we've been talking to Michael Staley about it, and every occult shop now has Kenneth Grant. Well, good occult bookshop has Kenneth Grant books in it again now, which is it's a great thing to see, and I just see him popping up everywhere, even in conspiracy circles again, which is
yeah,
not so great. But it's like, yeah, I think maybe people. I'm not saying we're going post Crowley now, but it does feel like people are kind of yearning for something, a bit more juicy or a bit sort of outside of because Crowley's very kind of dogmatic. He has a system and you stick to that system. And if you've
yeah,
ever
yeah.
been in the OTO or around OTO people, you know that it's all
Yep.
it's like it's a Crowley fan club a lot of the time, and it's like
Yeah,
no,
yeah,
we stick to that. That's it. Whereas Grant and Parsons and I don't know, Austin Osman Spare, these sort of people, they all seem to
yeah,
like
yeah,
take this kind of system and then sort of just go crazy with it. Especially Grant. I mean, I went a bit mad rereading all of those books. There's so much
yeah.
so much to take in. You're just like, oh my god, it's like, yeah, and he takes it in some really quite questionable at times directions, but interesting directions at least. And but
Well,
yeah,
he's
no,
adventurous at least. At least he's adventurous.
yeah, exactly. He's not, and
Yeah,
he doesn't feel like a lot of Crowley. Obviously, he's very steeped in the Bible and biblical language, and kind of because obviously that's how he was raised in a really strict religion,
yeah,
the Plymouth Brethren. But whereas Grant and Parsons, etc., they all feel like they're not being kind of held back by that almost. Crowley always feels like he's slightly held back. He's kind of really attached to that biblical stuff still in a way. He's anchored by it in a way, whereas these guys are sort of freed from it. And I wonder if that again, it's like it always comes back to religion with me at the moment. It seems like it's like it really feels like that's what's going on, and people are kind of finally going, okay, let's actually look at this kind of stuff now and see see if it works. I guess.
Well, I mean, people have pointed this out before, I know, but Crowley not only came from a religious background, but he came up through the Golden Dawn,
Mm-hmm.
and the Golden Dawn is highly Masonic, but it also is Christian. It's like very Christian oriented. Like if you look at the lesser banishing ritual of the pentagram, that's really a Christian-oriented ritual.
You have the four angels, don't you? Yeah.
The four angels, the host. You're making the sign of the cross when you're drawing it down, and so. And I'm not saying it doesn't work, because it does. I'm just saying that you have to be cognizant of that. That it's rooted in that, and I think that the origin of that, if you look at what happened in the Renaissance, you had Pico della Mirandola, who was doing all this work with the materials that were coming over, was definitely cognizant of the fact that he had to be careful about what was written, because it was still in a time where you could get in a lot of trouble by saying the wrong thing in front of the church, right? I mean, it definitely was past the Inquisition, but the Renaissance was happening, but it hadn't happened. You know what I'm saying? So a lot of that stuff got filtered through Christianity. That's how you got Kabbalah with a C, right? So you got all this Christian interpretation and all these Christian filters around it, which, I understand they did that to probably save their life in the limb, or at very least, like be able to work again. But that's where a lot of these ideas came from, that translation. So you just have to remember that there's the patina of Christianity that's going to follow that for a little while until it gets knocked off.
And the other thing was, I was on the One-on-One podcast recently. That comes out next month, I think. But I was talking to the host on that, and he was saying, well, why does Crowley always speak in kind of riddles, or in this kind of backwards language? Like the example everyone always gives is the blood of the moon, which means menstrual blood, and then kill 150 children or whatever, which is obviously but it's like, well, the reason he did that was because the nation England at the time was extremely Christian, and if you publish stuff like that, you would be put in prison. It's as simple as that. I think, and again, that's another dovetailing back towards the Christianity thing. That's Crowley's another massive target. He always gets targeted by. I mean, that's nothing new. He's always been targeted by conspiracy theories.
Yeah.
It's, again, that seems to have come back round again as well now. So now Crowley's seen as, he's been called the Satanist again, and the devil. It's like we've just spent the last 30 years going, no, he wasn't a Satanist. It's like now he's a Satanist again. It's like, okay.
Well, I mean, he has a little bit of a responsibility for that, because. And I totally resonate with why he did this, because I do it sometimes. It's like when you get accused of doing ridiculous shit, sometimes the funniest thing to yourself to do is to lean into it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Which he did. He totally did.
Oh, he was like,
well, of course, I'm the most evil man.
He was like the Kardashian of his times. He loved scandal. He loved all of that kind of stuff. He loved anything to sort of,
Alistair Kardashian.
Yeah. But yeah.
So it's funny when you do. It's funny to yourself when you do that. It's funny because like the people that you're trying to trigger get triggered. So it's kind of a troll. Crowley was a troll for sure.
Oh yeah.
A pre-internet troll, and it's funny. It's funny until it's not funny, because sometimes that stuff comes back to roost on you. I'll just say that. Mm-hmm. When people start showing up on your doorstep, then it gets not so funny.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's interesting with his Plymouth Brethren connection, because the Plymouth Brethren have a guy, I think his name is George Pember, who in the late 1800s was writing a book on the sort of the pre-flood narrative, right? And so in the book of Genesis, there's read a certain way because of the translations and because of the way it's written. There looks like there was an earth before earth, or at least there was a human before human, right? And I think George Hunt Williamson and possibly Von Daniken go into that in terms of, these were what's his name? Oh man, I can't. His name's Brinsley Pour-le-Trench. Is that? I think Brinsley Pour-le-Trench, who's he was the one who brought the UFO topic to Parliament in Britain. He actually brought that, because Prince Philip was really interested. He was a loyal subscriber to the Flying Saucer Review. So Brinsley Portler Trench talks about this too, this idea that there was, in Genesis, there's this pre-existing thing that then gets disappears, and then you have Adam, right? And so George Pember wrote about that, but he wrote about it and the flood and the Nephilim and the idea of the demons mating with humans and the rest of it. Pember was a prominent Plymouth Brethren, and wrote a book that was about basically psychic research at the time, framed as a pre-deluge methodology of the Nephilim, right? And so as Spiritism and spiritualism were coming into the fore in the 1800s and early 1900s, you had that being framed as a return to, this idea of the demons coming back, and one of the folks that Crowley drew on a lot, Ida Craddock, she had written a book called The Heavenly Bridegroom, which is where a lot of the sort of sex magic components come in. And she said that she had a spirit husband, and she framed it in the same way, whereas, she was looking at the Genesis text and this idea that, or incubus, succubus narratives from the Middle Ages and that. And so it's really interesting that kind of Christian influence, it's such a prevalent worldview that's just sort of bled into everything. And you see it continuously comes up, even when people are standing outside that, they're still drawing on this narrative that's been given,
It's just depressing, because it did feel like we were scrubbing it away for a while.
Yeah.
But now it feels like it's bleeding back in again, and like it always does.
Yeah,
and it's
well, and that's the spiritual warfare thing too. It's really interesting. I mean, that's by design, I mean, they're reframing and taking over ideas. They search out egregores, they search out memes, and then they insert their narrative into it and reframe it such that meme can still sit where it naturally would be, or that idea can sit in its culture, enculturation, where it came from, but then it's got that subtle twist that brings it back to sort of a form of evangelism to draw people in. And it's interesting too, because the rite of exorcism, right, you have to, it's actually a rite of conjuration, because if you look at the actual performance of exorcism, whether it's Catholic or Protestant or in Tibetan tradition, Buddhist traditions, Taoist traditions, African tradition, wherever you go and you see this idea of taking a possessing spirit out of somebody, you have to name it and conjure it first, right? And so in a weird way, this Christianization of things, they're naming demons and they're creating the demon that then needs to be taken out by Christianity, right? You look at this thing and you're saying that's the reason that you're depressed, well, that's a demon. And that demon of alcohol, the demon of schizophrenia, the demon of religion, the demon of Buddha, whatever it is. So they name it as a demon, they frame it, they clothe it in all of your problems, and then they offer you the solution. They're
creating an egregore. That's what it sounds like.
Yeah. That's exactly. That's
well,
exactly.
It's also marketing 101. Create the problem and then offer the solution for sale. Yeah.
Yeah. Yon Juliano, right? Like writing about Eros and Magick in the Renaissance, talking about how Renaissance concepts of magic and enchantment and phantasm are all directly analogous to public relations and marketing, and advertising.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's like what's his name? David Icke says problem, reaction, solution, doesn't he? That's one of his big conspiracy kind of mantras, isn't it?
The Hegelian dialectic.
Yeah, exactly.
The applied Hegelian dialectic.
And then he starts talking about reptiles.
Does he still talk about that? Does he still talk about that?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
Does he? Huh.
Yeah, although he was always like a bit of a stop out almost. You could almost get away with liking David Icke because he was a bit new age, a bit kind of a little bit less. But more recently, he seems to be cashing in a bit on this kind of weird middle-aged conspiracy theory, I call it. You know, like
I see him.
Yeah, go on.
I was just gonna say I see him floating through the 5D
Oh yeah, yeah.
memes.
That's what I
You know,
mean.
Oh
Yeah.
yeah. Oh yeah.
live like get out of the Matrix stuff.
Well, that's the crazy
What
thing. Like recently, I gave this example, I think, on another show. But there's a guy down the road from me who used to run a YouTube channel. Well, still runs the YouTube channel. But the YouTube channel's content used to be completely different. He used to have like, I don't know, 20,000 subscribers, and he used to go on these walks through the British countryside, and the whole point of the thing would be him walking around the British countryside and showing people, you know, these kind of sites or heritage buildings or whatever. You know, it's all very very homely and kind of, you know, very. And then all of a sudden he did a commentary on a conspiracy video that came out. It'd obviously been bubbling up in his mind or whatever. I can't remember the name of I couldn't remember it last time actually. The name of it was with Nick Shrek. That's when it was. It's in the Nick Shrek episode. But all of a sudden he did this one video, and he suddenly gets tons and tons of new subscribers, completely changes his content. And what's really interesting is he's from this group that I'm sort of seeing all the time now. It's like people in their kind of very late 40s, 50s, no, maybe like mid 50s onwards, I'd say, that never would have been into conspiracy theories before. But all of a sudden they're like, there's entire groups. There's like Karens in the, you know, in the US, like in Middle America, that all over the place though. In America, it seems as well. Like people from this age, this demographic that were never interested in conspiracy theory before, just especially since like the lockdowns and stuff, have just exploded. Like they're everywhere, and it's like and it's so strange seeing that stuff being kind of mainstream now. It's like. It's still like I find it, you know, it's crazy. Like I was in a queue in the supermarket the other day in front of like behind rather two ladies, and must have been early 60s, late 50s, you know, that sort of age range. Both of them just talking about chemtrails and all the, you know, all the stuff. Yeah, it's so bizarre. It's like, really, this group? It's like they're the conspiracy theorists now. It's like, when did that happen?
Well, you know,
how did that happen? That's the
a lot of this happened. Excuse me, with the popularity of yoga, and the yoga channels were getting all this targeted advertising through the you know. The algorithms, all this stuff was like getting advertised to these yoga people, and so they got exposed to it again and again and again and again, and that you know, like to some people that has an effect.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and also with the economic trouble, people need an answer. You know, you saw that with I'm forgetting the guy's name. Eben Alexander came out with that book on near-death experiences, and you know, he was a neurosurgeon that had a near-death experience, and so he wrote about it, and it was you know, I saw it at like the grocery store, right? It was big enough where like the book was just available everywhere, but it came out at a time period where the demographic shift was shifting towards, you know, an older population, especially the demographics that were buying these books, or that were buying books, period, right? Like it was all shifting towards folks who were approaching death, and they needed to deal with that. And so you saw this massive upswing, both, and, you know, Christianity again being sort of a marker for the market, because they're constantly trend watching to hijack the trend, to trend jack it. And the, you know, that stuff came out, and it was just this demographic shift towards, you know, more people that were of an older demographic that had these questions and wanted answers. And so suddenly there was this market for NDEs, you know, and I think with all the shifts in politics and the economy and just the changes in the world and stuff like that, you know, and all of this stuff was predicted in a lot of the forecasting in the 70s. You know, these shifts that were going to happen as the population aged, as they were facing different technology, you know, as things got more confusing. I mean, you look at like the congressional hearings on social media, where they don't even know how Facebook works. They've like never been on it. They're totally like this mind-boggling, like, whoa, there's Twitter? Like, what is that? And so they you know, that confusion, then when you stick these answers, like, well, it's because of the reptilians, it's because of the chemtrails, you know, like, of course you're confused.
It's the
Like
same
your
function.
head's filled with aluminum dioxide. Like,
I said this
yeah.
in the I said this in the Shrek interview as well. That it not Shrek as in Nicholas Shrek interview. It was Christianity, conspiracy theory and Christianity both have they're both sort of different, but they have the same function in that they kind of both explain away chaos, don't they? So
Yeah.
you've got Christianity, obviously, if something goes wrong, it's God's will. You know that there's chaos in the universe. It's because it's part of God's plan, and you know, God works in a mysterious way. And with conspiracy theory, you get the same thing. So you've got, you know, if there's chaos in the world, it's the Illuminati, or it's you know, it's the reptile people, or you know, whatever. It's the lizards. Maybe it's appealing to people that kind of want to be Christians, but don't really want to be Christians, but need that kind of chaos explaining mechanism. That's kind of the way I kind of, they both have that mechanism built into them, and it's a coping strategy, isn't it? To me, that's what it feels like. Anyway, you can blame it on somebody else. It's not, you know, it's not something out of our control. It's been controlled by someone, and we can stop it. That's kind of what it always feels like to me, anyway.
Well, I don't know about you guys, but I've I've noticed a lot of people that were recently that were what I consider to be not very likely candidates for converting to Christianity.
Yeah.
That's been happening a lot lately. People from the radical environmentalist movement, which I am a part of, like suddenly becoming Orthodox Christians.
Yeah.
And I'm like, what? Where did that come from? People that were, I don't want to say any names, but people that like are steeped in mythology and folklore and things like that, suddenly converting. People that were, you know, previously pagan, converting to Christianity, and they all have like this, you know, like this explanation for it, but it mostly boils down to that they're afraid of the turmoil and the confusion that's happening in the world, and they're looking for an answer.
Yeah.
It's really that simple.
Yeah.
Yeah. Chaos.
And as Joe, you were saying with the algorithms and just the amount of targeted information in that. Yeah. And it's interesting too, because it's like, it's a kickback from people that, you know, you're producing YouTube content or you're producing some form of content, right? And like, there's these tools you can use to get that in front of the people who will be susceptible to that, to buy the product, to watch it, to get the click. And so what's the easiest thing to hit is those fears, right? And what is easy, I mean, like I saw it was awesome. There's this Bigfoot, I think it's Sasquatch Chronicles, right? And it's, you know, it's completely Bigfoot niche oriented content, right? And it's a lot of listener stories kind of stuff, you know, like so-and-so was in the Texas like desert and they saw a Bigfoot or whatever. And they had this one story from Arizona. But what got me to actually look at it was the fact that the preview image was two guys playing paintball, right? And it was Sasquatch Chronicles. This is on Instagram. And it was Sasquatch Chronicles, and it's two guys in the mask with the paintball guns, with the, you know, the netting and everything, and they're sitting there playing paintball. And I was like, what does this have? Are they playing paintball and a Bigfoot came, or like what? Like what's this? What is this story? So I look at it. No, they just needed a stock image for guys shooting guns. So they used people playing paintball. And that's the level. There's another one. It's a popular YouTube channel where they put together these sort of like pan and scan Ken Burns, you know, like montages to go along with like dramatic readings of listener stories. And they had this one where the story involved this guy encountering a dog man, and he went off road, right? Like he drove off the road or something, and there was a dog man. But the image that they used, it was stock image of somebody like four-wheeling through the mud. And I was like, well, this is a story about somebody driving their sedan like onto a dirt road, and like you literally have people just like peeling out in the mud, you know, like Tokyo Drift, like whoa. And I'm like, this is not the story. Like but it didn't matter, right? Because it was just that illustrates somebody driving in the mud. There you go, done. And people are eating it up. Like it's just, you know, so when you think about this, you know, people adopting these ideas, the threshold is low. You know, I mean, the need for sophisticated content is not really, you can just, whatever sort of looks like similar-ish, you know, and then people develop their own stories because they're searching for these answers, you know. And so, but it's really interesting because in the past, you know, it would take like Time magazine, or it would take Life magazine, or it would take the New York Times or somebody to really push that. But now it's just people that are like, I need more clicks on my ad revenue. Let me just put this up, you know.
And you know what's going to happen with that. You know that the Chinese whispers effect is going to happen, where people have read that or listened to that Sasquatch story, and now it's going to mutate into, oh, there's this story where Sasquatch was driving a 4-wheel across the. It's kind of how this stuff happens, isn't it? It's like
that's exactly Well, and you have this thing too, where like I mean, with the New York Times story in 2017, Leslie Kean and Ralph Blumenthal, right? That sort of brought the authorization to look and take UFOs seriously, right? Or and now UAPs, right? And that 2017 article was sort of the crux point of that, in pushing it into the media. You'd had build up to it, the New York Times thing hit. But I've been tracking the public interest through Google Trends, right? You can see people, what people search for and that kind of thing on Google Trends. It's a sloppy way to do it. It's like it's not, if you're doing actual data analytics, it's obviously not the way to do a really robust analysis of it, but it's good enough. And it's good enough to show that people don't care. The public does not care. So that then there was a lot of conversation, you know, amongst academics and, you know, people, scientists and that wanted to look at this stuff of, oh, well, the New York Times has authorized this look, right? Well, it may have authorized it for, you know, people in Silicon Valley and people at universities and scientists, you know, researchers, but it did not authorize it for the public. The public didn't care. And if you look at when the trend actually spiked, it was in 2008 or 2010. There was Stevensville, Texas, over George Bush's ranch. There was a sighting of these UFOs like this, and it was a big thing. And a local journalist went in and started investigating it. Ended up killing her career because she took it too seriously and was actually trying to find answers. But the public was interested in that because people saw it. Real people saw it. The stuff that's being talked about now in military training ranges, military pilots, no one in the public gives a crap about that stuff. They don't care. They didn't see it. There's no flap. You know, I mean, in the 70s, you had flyovers over Georgia. Police are chasing UFOs. You know, you have this people, like actual civilian public, seeing this stuff, but it hasn't shifted it. And you see, I mean, no matter, and I can see the congressional hearings, nobody cared. It didn't. I thought, well, maybe this is going to push the needle. No, because no one is actually seeing these things. Like there's no flap, you know. There's some stuff in Peru and South America, Brazil, where there's some cases and stuff like that. But the U.S. population and the global population isn't focused on those kind of local issues. You know, if something locally happened in you know, like if there was a big wave over London, like, and people saw it, then it would move the needle. If there was a big wave over, you know, Los Angeles or New York or something, people, or even local stuff, right? Like people would be interested. There was the O'Hare sighting in the 2000s where that kind of pushed the needle up, you know. But what does push the needle is this low level YouTube content and social media content, TikTok, Instagram, Reels, and that kind of thing, Twitter, right? That do push it, and do push it deeper than when it comes out in the mainstream media, which wasn't always the case. You know, it used to be, again, you know, once the mainstream media signed off on something, oh, okay, it's cool to believe it now. Now let's talk about it. But now it's this sort of, you know, it's this stuff coming up from the street level, or, you know, the level of people just looking to monetize content. And that's pushing like worldviews, which is really disturbing and strange.
Yeah.
Well, you can have a YouTube channel now, and you can do a video on a YouTube channel, and if you have the right YouTube channel, you can get more views than a mainstream network show will get.
Yeah. Well, Svenghoulie, right? Svenghoulie, who's the horror host in Chicago.
Yeah.
There was an article that came out that was looking at the rise in his career again, and he's getting better viewership than CNN on his time
Yeah.
slot.
Yeah.
You know, and this is a guy that's been around since the 70s who took over from someone else doing a horror host, like a classic, you know,
Yep.
dressed up and doing schlocky dad jokes with horror movies, you know, and that's getting better viewership than CNN.
Yeah, I think I had one of his. I think I bought a DVD. It was introduced by Svenghoulie. It's like a horror film. Yeah.
Yeah, that's likely. Yeah.
Yeah, I'd like to object to the fact that he dropped the son of, but okay.
I know.
Because I'm from the generation of the original Svenghoulie, so
yeah, which was a different animal.
Huh?
He was a different animal too when Jerry was.
Yeah. It was Jerry Lee Bishop, I think his name was.
Yeah.
Jerry G. Bishop. Yeah, he basically he was a Groucho Marx enthusiast, and very surreal, very drug oriented, without necessarily like really saying drugs, but implying drugs a lot. So yeah, I grew up with that, and when the current guy came out, he originally was called the Son of Svenghoulie, but then they eventually dropped that and went back to Svenghoulie. Does anybody remember To the Stars Academy?
Oh yeah.
I have a T-shirt, man. I have a T-shirt that Greg Bishop got me when he was visiting with them. He actually went and hung out with Lou Elizondo to talk to him. I don't know if he was. I think he was bringing. He and a group of folks designed. You know those Brian Eno cards. I forget what they're called.
Yeah.
But
Oblique Strategies.
Oblique Strategies. Yeah. So they did oblique strategies for UFOs. And he brought Elizondo that and then some other stuff, and they talked. And I was like, "You get me a T-shirt from this group. This is exciting." So I have a T-shirt, from them.
Was that the Blink One?
Well, I mean,
guy?
They seem to be the ones that really kicked this off, and now they almost feel sidelined.
Yeah, well they were and that's the interesting thing. And this is the kind of stuff that to me I'm like, okay, if you're gonna research this stuff, like unless you see a UFO or you're gonna go out and actually try to contact stuff, if you're gonna just be talking about hearsay, it's much more interesting to do an analysis of these kind of things, right? Like the fact that To the Stars came out, you know, it had Put Off, right? It had you had Elizondo, you had people from Lockheed Martin coming out, you know, like talking UFOs and all that. And then they go away. And they went away because Tom DeLonge reframed the organization from "we're going to build a saucer" to "oh, by the way, we're just a media organization and I've got some like fiction that I'm going to be framing this stuff through." But they didn't, you know, they served their purpose, right? Like if they had stuck around, like they're never going to build a saucer. Like we're not going to see a To the Stars, like Tom DeLonge led company building a UFO. You know, that's never going to happen. But it got that idea into the public, and then they're gone and drift away. And now they can make their fiction, and they can. I think they still have another book coming out with Lavenda. You know, so like you can bring that stuff in and then go away, and that's fine because it works and it moves on. And then Lou Elizondo came out of To the Stars, and he was able to be the government insider guy who said a lot of stuff and Chris Mellon, the former like undersecretary for defense intelligence or whatever he was, you know, like he can come out and Chris Mellon's interesting because he actually was one of the people who signed off on the declassification of the remote viewing program. So these people have been in it for a long time, you know, and he was able to come out. He was then framed as a media person. They had that TV show on History Channel, and it served its purpose of atmosphere. It created the atmosphere where the conversation could be had. You had your experts from the government come out; those could be replaced by other experts, you know, and so it forms this really interesting sort of tool, you know, in the media environment. But everybody just wants, you know, they want their saucer. And to me, it's much more the To the Stars thing is much more interesting, you know, and they're under, you know, they're being sued right now for their the fundraising that they did and tax issues, you know. So I mean that's more interesting to me, you know.
They seem to me like what we used to call in the software industry a loss leader.
Yeah.
which
Yeah.
is
Exactly.
which is necessary to break open a market, especially
Right.
a unknown market. But once they
That's
serve their
exactly
purpose, they generally don't. They're not the ones that reap the benefit. Like somebody comes along, they don't make any money on it. They usually lose money. They break the ice, and then somebody usually comes behind them and then reaps the benefit.
right.
And I don't
Well,
know
and
who's
it's
coming behind them, but it seems like a lot of people are trying to come behind them.
yeah. Well, I mean, it's interesting. Lou Elizondo was with Two of the Stars, right? And he was the
Yeah,
source
yeah,
or one of the main sources for that 2017 New York Times piece. um, he's the one. You know, he knew Grush beforehand.
yeah.
You know, so these people have all been. And to me, what's really interesting too is the fact that a lot of Put Off and some of the other people had a lot of contact with Robert Bigelow, right? Who did
Oh
his
yeah,
NIDS,
yeah. Bigelow, yeah.
you know. And so, but what's interesting about Bigelow is Bigelow funded Art Bell's first iteration of what would be Coast to Coast existed prior to that, but I think it was called Area 52 with Art Bell or something like that. But it was basically when he was doing NIDS and that, where he wanted a media organ that could popularize the ideas and could talk about it. And you go to old Art
Yep,
Bell, and Art Bell's always talking about Bigelow and my
yep,
friend, and you know
yep.
he has this ranch and this whatever, and Area 52, this thing that Bigelow actually paid for to be out, was a loss leader. Bigelow said, I don't think you can get enough content to run this any longer. Like, I'll give you this much funding and then it's done. And Art Bell just pivoted that content to Coast, right?
Mm-hmm,
And then
mm-hmm.
Coast to Coast becomes this massive organ of dissemination for these ideas. When the remote viewing program becomes declassified, what's the first place that the remote viewers go to? They go to Coast, right? Like,
Mm-hmm,
so it
mm-hmm.
was, you know, it becomes this thing. And I think that, you know, To the Stars Academy, with so many people involved, I'm not saying Bigelow paid for it or anything, but those people in that group, you know, knowing this sort of like, and you know, Bigelow is an entrepreneur, right? Like he funded a consciousness chair at the University of Boulder, but he only funded it for like one or two people. I think it was like Dean Radin and maybe Charles Tart, maybe, but it was like one or two, and then he dropped it because it wasn't doing anything. Like, he is an
Mm-hmm,
entrepreneur. He will put money
mm-hmm,
in. He'll put a bunch of money in. If it doesn't work, move on to the
mm-hmm.
next one.
Move on to the
Throw the
next one.
spaghetti
Yep.
at the wall. Like, what doesn't stick, and move on. And so, To the Stars Academy perfectly fits that bill, right? Like, you throw it at the wall. Okay, this version of it's not going to fly. What do we have? And you can see it then break off into these little, you know, smaller, more easily run sort of aspects of it, you know, and getting
Mm-hmm,
people
mm-hmm.
then do it themselves, right? You get
Was
a bunch of people
Bigelow
who are like, oh, I want to run the research organization, and then they'll start one up themselves, and it'll work or it won't.
was Bigelow the guy that owned Skinwalker Ranch for a while?
Yep,
Yeah,
Yeah,
yep,
yeah,
yeah.
yeah. Okay, yeah,
yep.
that's interesting because that became a big thing, didn't it, a few years ago as well?
Yeah. Yeah,
Skinwalker
well,
was
and
like,
Bigelow, yeah, in the same time period, because it came out that, you know, it actually had government funding behind it, right? Like, he was looking for grants. He worked with NASA and stuff. It wasn't NASA grants that went into Skinwalker, but the Department of Defense put grant money into project money into the Skinwalker thing, you know. And the thing that's interesting with Bigelow too is if you there's a British researcher who goes under the name Isaac Coy, and he put together a list of people who got funding from Bigelow. Conspiracy people take it one way, but the way that I saw it, I was amazed at the influence that he had in the conversation. You know, he funded Raymond Moody, right? So then he was interested in near-death stuff. So he funded Raymond Moody. He funded the some of the stuff from Kenneth Ring, which is the Omega Project, which looked at the similarities between abduction experiences and UFO experiences and near-death experiences. He funded just so many people. He funded Dean Radin, right? Like, who's the big proponent of parapsychology now, and works with IONS, the Institute of Noetic Sciences. And he put funding in, little seed funding into all these different areas, which then became like the hubs of what we think about when we think about this stuff. You know, near-death experiences, abduction research. He was real big on abduction research. He funded some of John Mack's stuff. You know, he funded books to be published and that kind of thing. And so, and he did it from what I can tell, and from what I can tell in knowing some of the academics involved in this area and knowing the researchers and that kind of thing, it isn't a conspiracy thing, right? Like, this guy's not some massive puppet master that's working. He honestly has an interest in it. At points, I would say even in a naive interest in it. And he just did what he does as an entrepreneur, and put money into the things that he thought, needed more money. Because what happened after the government psychic programs in the U.S. was that up to that point, it was mostly foundations. It was, establishment, wealthy establishmentarians putting money into this research. But after the whole government psychic warfare program, that really dropped off, and you didn't have individual donors that were as involved. A lot of what we know as this topic, right? Like the way that it's framed and the topic, the areas that we understand are because they were the specific areas of interest for donors who put money into the different programs and paid for researchers to go out. And there was that great period where the National Enquirer was paying for they had a UFO focus, and Alan Hynek was on their blue ribbon panel or whatever, they had some serious people. They sent their Bob Pratt down to South America to look into abduction cases and mutilation cases. But that was National Enquirer money, right? Which is organized crime and blackmail, putting that into it. And that's what, it's like the same thing with jazz. Like, you're either going to get paid by individual rich people who really like jazz. If you look at the foundation of jazz, it was organized crime. It was rich people who wanted to have a house band, and then now it's like government grant funding for arts projects, and the psychic research program went through and the UFOs and all that sort of goes through the same cycle, And for my money, it's better when the organized crime people and the exploitators are paying for it, because they give freedom to the writer to write whatever, go out and do it. And as long as we can sell it, we'll sell it,
Some of the greatest literature of the 20th century was originally funded by, pornography / organized crime.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's hilarious to look at the 70s too, because the media organs that were talking about the psychic research programs, a lot of the stuff, it was exploitation magazines. Myron Foss, who, he started out doing porn stuff, and then he was doing horror comics, where he was just basically plagiarizing the EC Comics stuff and the original golden age of 50s horror comics. He was just taking that stuff and having people repaint it and then publishing even more lurid and bloody. He was big after Jaws. He had an amazing run of sharksploitation, whereas these magazines, it was just like sharks, and then it was just like blood, and he would have his artists paint blood into the mouth, and people, it was amazing. But this guy ran the psychic magazines that Uri Geller was in. And the reason that he did it was because people were interested, they buy it. He did a UFO magazine too. That was one of the major UFO magazines, publishing Keel and all the rest of it. And it was just, it made money. And his rule was he had a set amount that it had to sell, and he would cut it off. He wouldn't publish the next, you could have things ready for the next thing. If it didn't sell the right amount, done. We're moving on to the next thing that sells. And it just so happened that psychic stuff and UFOs in the 70s sold. But he had, some of the things that people look back on now and say, oh, this is an example. I mean, you can look in with Uri Geller. It's hilarious to see the researchers writing about Uri Geller doing a public spoon bending experiment in a major magazine, right? And talking about how this is this popular publication that is read by X number, and they're doing this whole analysis of this public experiment. But the public experiment was run in a magazine that was published by Myron Foss, who is just like this wacky, amazing exploitation guy, but they don't know that, right? Like, all they see is, well, this is on the newsstands, and this is talking about our research, so let's analyze it. And they don't recognize that, Myron Foss is just this complete exploitation guy who's like, yeah, this will sell, Yeah,
it's interesting. Didn't Bob Wilson came from? He used to write in Playboy, didn't he?
Yeah,
yeah,
Playboy,
he did.
Playboy had a huge thing. I mean, Keel wrote for Playboy too.
So It's all about porn. Porn's what brought it all to us.
It's where the money is. I mean, that's the thing with this stuff. Is where's the funding going to come from? And that's what makes me upset about the UAP thing now is government money has not only strings attached to it, but it has it's short-sighted. It's often misspent. You know, it's misdirected. The only way you're going to get government money is with a doctorate and an institution behind you that's huge. And and to get to that point, you've had to like completely not look at so many different things in your topic. And then at the end of the day, they want a product, right? Like you can't go to the military and be like, I want to explore human potentials. Like, okay, how are we going to weaponize that? Like, is that going to make people, you know, can we create a medical device out of this? And you can see it in the Institute of Noetic Science now, like, Edgar Mitchell's mission was like, I went up to space and I had the overview effect and I saw the world and now we need to explore these human potentials. Ions now is like, how do we monetize this? Like, how can we create a product? And so the example that just sticks with me is the idea of imbuing intention on an object, right? So this idea that like if you have a distance healing effect, right, and you can then take that distance of healing effect and like the shape of water idea, right, like the idea that intention influences the shape of water crystals or water molecules kind of thing. So using that, they did experiments with imbuing intention on cotton cloth, right? So that if you could do that, then you could imbue healing intention on cotton cloth and sell the cotton cloth as a product, right? Like it's your enhanced bandage, right, or whatever. But the thing is, that's a prayer handkerchief, like Oral Roberts.
I was going to say, yeah,
it's a prayer handkerchief.
Yep.
You know, but they don't say that. You know, why don't they say that? Because it doesn't sound good. You know, that's not the way to do it. Now, if we had exploitation people doing it, we would have people saying like, hey, it's the psychic prayer cloth research and frame it through that, you know. And the only way you have that freedom is the money from porn, because people, you know, I mean, your market for porn is huge. Your market for any of the rest of this stuff is much smaller, to the point of being niche and non-existent. But when you have, you know, like Omni Magazine didn't exist because there was this huge readership that was all super excited for Omni Magazine. It existed because Guccioni's wife was really interested in these topics and said, hey, you need to fund a magazine for this. So you get the guy from Penthouse making, you know, or making the giving the funding to create Omni Magazine, which becomes this amazing, you know, cultural artifact that couldn't have existed without all the money behind porn, because the circulation itself did not pay for that magazine. It didn't pay for those illustrations. It didn't pay for having some of the top sci-fi writers and, you know, top thinkers and all the rest of it. You couldn't pay for that with the actual circulation. You paid for it because it was being funded by porn and exploitation.
Who funds Nexus magazine? Do you remember Nexus magazine?
Oh yeah.
I do, but I don't remember who funded it.
I bought one a few months ago, and it's a conspiracy magazine now, isn't it? It's really bizarre.
Yeah.
I'm sure
is
it used
it?
to be. Yeah, it used to be kind of like UFOs and kind of like high strangeness, didn't it? It was almost like a sort of tidier 14 Times at one point. When I was younger, I remember reading it a lot. But then I picked one up thinking, oh God, I didn't even know it was still going. And I found it in an occult bookshop in London. And it was just all about 5G and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
I was like, oh no.
Oh God.
And also it was very, it was all about like cancel culture and, you know, it was it had a definite political shift as well. It was really, that was kind of interesting as well. It's like, that stuff kind of seems to go hand in hand a lot now, doesn't it? I've been having this idea. It's just an idea at the moment, but I'm sort of thinking about possibly it being something I might write about. But I've come up with this. Well, I haven't come up with this idea, but I've been collecting these ideas of municipal magic. I'm calling it at the moment. It's the kind of weird term I'm using, but I find it fascinating when governments or kind of municipal groups become interested in occult subjects, and it just kept coming up over and over again in my sort of news feeds and things like the Monroe Institute and their involvement with the CIA. I mean, you could say Montauk to a degree, couldn't you? Depending on how real that is, I don't know. But there's something particularly fascinating about when a government becomes interested in something that strange.
Yeah.
I don't know why I find that so fascinating, but it's like very early days at the moment. But I'm starting to sort of collect these kind of these encounters almost where almost like our world hits the government world, and it's kind of like it's a sort of fascinating thing. But what about you guys? Have you ever encountered this kind of stuff as well? Or
usually when when a municipal organization is paying attention to something we'll call weird, it's in one sense it's a good framework that they're looking at it for. They're like, what is this as a phenomena, and how does it affect us, and how does it affect our people, and these
how
kind of
can we
things.
exploit it is usually the other thing.
Well, and that's the part.
Yeah.
That's the part where
Yeah.
it kind of goes off the rails for me. Is like, and how can we exploit this? But the first part, at least, is interesting. It's like, like let's look at this objectively and what is it as a phenomena, instead of like, how does this work? How do we believe it? How can we believe it? Let's just look at what it is and see how it affects the populace. And then, of course, that always segues into, and how can we leverage that? So if we could cut that part off, but unfortunately we're humans, and we don't, and we can't. So,
but what's interesting is what got it to that point, though. What was so special about these particular things that warranted money from the government to investigate them? That's the kind of thing that's interesting to me.
Well, it's usually because they're looking at a way to exploit it.
Yeah, I guess. Yeah, so. Yeah.
Or fears, right? I mean, the Monroe Institute. The reason that they became one. Robert Monroe was a wealthy. He had brought cable television to Virginia, right? So he was a wealthy television executive. I think he did audio as well. He was established. He was an established figure. So when he wrote this thing about out-of-body experience, and not only did he write it, but he also funded a research group to create binaural beats and to look at the sounds and that could retrain the brainwave, like Psychic Secrets from Behind the Iron Curtain, or whatever that was, the book that came out in like 70s, like 71 or so, that wrote about, the Soviets have this stuff, right? Like the Soviets are doing it. And it was called the Psi Gap, right? We had the missile gap, which was, they've got more missiles than we have, and there was the Psi Gap, which was, Soviets, they're doing all this research into this stuff. We need to get on that too. And so Monroe had, wasn't
it? I think they were called the cosmonauts.
Oh, the Cosmos? Yeah, the Russian Cosmos.
Cosmos. Yeah, sorry, that's not cosmonauts. Yeah.
And so they, so there was this need for it, and then who do you go to, right? And that, I love this concept of municipal magic, because it's you're a respectable, organization, you're a government organization. Who do you go to look at the weird stuff which suddenly fits within your paradigm, right? Like the paradigm of the Cold War was us versus them. They've got it, we need it. Now where do we go? Right. Like you can't go to the people that are, on TV with like big hair and a cape and are like, I'm a psychic, but you can go to the respectable businessman who had these experiences, who's created an organization that can, enhance this stuff. Right. And so they start to bring in those people. And what's interesting now, I mean, you see it with the UAP thing, right? Like they have to go to certain people. They got to go. You can't go to, and they do, which is like the Aetherius Society. It's funny when they misstep and they bring in somebody who everybody within the culture knows, like, oh, that wasn't the person you should talk to, but they don't know that, but, you get Gary Nolan, right, who's at Stanford. And so he's perfect, right? He's at Stanford. He's as close to a Nobel, like almost nominee kind of thing. He's done all this stuff. He's had government clearance on his research for, the genetic stuff that he does, the biochemistry stuff that he does. He's a perfect establishment figure that can step forward and be authentic about it, to the municipality, to the government organization. And it's fascinating. And like Joe said, but at the end of the day, what is the government looking for, or these, more establishment groups, what are they looking for? They're looking for a product. They're not looking for the pure thing itself. They're looking for that thing so that they can use it against something else. Soviets have better psychics than we do. We need to train better psychics than the Soviets so that we can close the Psi Gap.
And that's hilarious, because I think from what my research showed me is that the Soviets didn't really have much success with their remote viewing psychic spy program, but they put it out that they did, and
Yeah.
in doing so, they created the SciGap, which didn't
Yeah.
really exist, but they created it, and then we, the United States, threw all this money into remote viewing, and we sent out like Jim Channon, who came back and kind of went native, as they used to say. It's like he comes back and he's like one of them all of a sudden, which was I
Yeah.
thought
Yeah.
majorly cool. I met Jim in Santa Barbara, and he was actually a really nice guy. He made me an honorary member of the First Earth Battalion, which I was like, thank you.
Yeah. Yeah.
I've been knighted. I've been anointed.
But the Russians, they had some interesting programs though that did seem
they
to
did,
be sort of like Kozyrev and that sort of
Yeah,
stuff's
the
really
Kozyrev mirrors are incredible.
Yeah.
I want to
yeah. I mean, that stuff is amazing. Like they did have a program, but I think they didn't have the success that they said they did, because that was kind of an op to say that they did. So it's kind of weird, because they probably did that to cause the United States to like spend a lot of time and resources on something they didn't feel would ever come to fruition or yield anything useful. And who knows? Like, really, I mean, you know, there's the A side and the B side. Like Channon actually came up with some interesting stuff. Whether you think he was crazy or not, he came up with some interesting stuff. On the other side of the coin, you've got the remote viewing program, which you got Ingo Swann, who I think was legitimate, but then you got Ed Dames, who I don't think was very legitimate at all. So, you know, it was hit and miss.
Yeah.
My favorite gap that is not talked about from that time period, and I ran into it and realized the concept of the gap, and I was blown away by it. I mean, like this is literally my favorite example of this is the Bigfoot gap. There are Soviet studies of the Patterson-Gimlin film that look at the cybernetic, right? Like look at it through an image of Soviet cybernetics, which is how does the human and the system interact with each other, right? And so it was analyzing the Bigfoot gate as an example of this perfect union of form and function. And so they analyzed the Patterson-Gimlin film as this psychocybernetic like example of the perfect form and function of a humanoid creature. And there's like 1 or 2 papers on this, and it's amazing. I mean, that's awesome. Like that to me is just that's a beautiful example of like the Soviets got there first. Like we need to go. Unfortunately, the U.S. obviously never had a Bigfoot weaponization program. Maybe they did. Maybe that's actually the deep black op is that they weaponize Bigfoot, you know, and we don't realize it, but there's Bigfoot super soldiers like wandering around. But yeah, it's a beautiful thing. I really this idea of municipal magic I think is wonderful and really timely too, because again, that's what's happening with this UAP stuff. You have
absolutely, yeah.
This topic is
something that's it's always sort of fascinated me in the background, but I've really started to sort of collect it up now a bit more, and sort of I have like a folder full of like little bits of research that I kind of need to put together and, you know, maybe put into like a book or something. I don't know, but I've got a ton of examples, and I'm really sort of focused in on it quite a lot at the moment. So it could be quite an interesting topic to, you know, investigate properly, I think.
Yeah,
might be a good book.
Anyway, but yeah, that was cool. I've got an idea of how I'm going to edit this now, especially because we could just have it so it dips in and out of the conversation a little bit, if you know what I mean. So it sort of, I was thinking maybe having like a sort of staticky sound or something, so that, you know. Do you see what I mean? So it almost feels like you're dropping. So it feels like as the listener you're dropping in on a conversation rather than it being like welcome to episode 1 or you know, all that kind of stuff. Yeah, it might be more interesting. So it's almost like you're intruding on a conversation. I like that kind of style.
Yeah, I love that. Yeah, I love that.
You're tuning in via your shortwave radio and picking this up.
Yeah.
Which you know, when I was a kid, I was into shortwave, and I used to do that. I would just sit and listen to other people talking. It was amazing.
Yeah, I mean, I try to force it here in Georgia. The radio possibilities are limited, you know. And when I was living on 114 acres in rural Georgia, so I was really like just dirt roads and like everything. And I would like kind of get it almost to the Christian station, you know, whatever they were playing, and like just sort of let it like sit in that in between, so you'd sort of catch some of it. And it was, you know, in 2017 when the UFO stuff came out, it was awesome because they all jumped on it. And so I have this like, you know, just listening to the staticky, and then suddenly it'd be UFOs and demons, and then static, and then some like gospel music. It's awesome. But it was a forced recreation of that time period, you know.
Like, there's a university somewhere over there in the States that has a shortwave. It has every shortwave band in the world, and you can manipulate it in a web interface. So you can literally just drag a dial. Yeah, and you can get some insane sounds out of that thing. It's like, it's really, you're like, what the hell causes that? It's like this strange like pulses, and it's I've sample heaven for someone that's really into like strange kind of experimental stuff. But yeah, no, I spent an age when I first found that. My girlfriend actually went mad. She was like, I cannot put up with that noise anymore. I've got hours of recordings of it set on a hard drive somewhere. But yeah, no, cool. I'm always looking out for number stations and things like that, trying to find. I must be able to find them on there somewhere, because it's literally every band of shortwave in the world.
There's still a few, but they're few. I'm a big listener of shortwave still. Yeah, the number stations have gone down in numbers. There's like not as many of them. You can find them, but they're not as prevalent as they used to be.